So my number one is Good Will Hunting, directed by Gus Van Sant. Has to be mentioned, written by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, starring Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and Robin Williams, Minnie Driver. Quick logline: Will Hunting, a janitor at MIT, has a gift of maths but needs help from a psychologist to find direction in his life. So I put this movie as my number one, which is probably not a surprise after everything that I've been saying. That to me, the relationship between Robin Williams and Matt Damon is sort of my ideal friendship, where friends
Mm.
are confidants, they are mentors, they push you, they challenge you, they make you see who you really are. It gets uncomfortable, but there's also love, support, vulnerability, all of that. Like, this is what I look for in friendships, and I've been lucky to find a couple because it's so rare to find those relationships, and I think
Mm-hmm.
this movie does such a brilliant job in showing that. But it also contrasts it with the other kind of friends that you have, like the friends that we've been talking about through our podcast today, which is friends who you grew up with, you maybe don't have much in common with, but you hang out every
Mm-hmm.
day or
Mm-hmm.
every other day. There is this unsaid support system that you have with them, but most likely you are going to go separate ways because you really don't have much in common,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't make those friendships invaluable. They're very much part of your narrative, your story, your journey. You wouldn't actually be seeking out those deeper friendships if you don't have those foundational, that foundational framework of friendship to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's such a great contrast between Ben Affleck, Casey Affleck, and all those guys who hang out with Matt Damon versus Matt Damon and Robin Williams' relationship. Even though it's the context of the movie is very different, but to me, from the first time I watched this movie, I think I was probably in my 20s, and now it's like a yearly watch. Whenever I'm craving that kind of sort of deeper, vulnerable, and I want to have an ugly cry watching a
Mm-hmm.
movie. This is
Mm-hmm.
that one of those movies that, even though it's sad and melancholic, but it's sort of, it's kind of a balm for me because it reminds me of the power of friendship, of people like that when they come to your life, what they can do for you. And I love that even though it's a therapist and client relationship, it's a relationship of equals because Robin Williams also has a lot of bottled up issues, even
Mm-hmm.
though he's so eloquent about Matt's issues because he's great at his job. But I
Right.
think the two end up pushing each other, the two end up showing that mirror to each other. So it's sort of the theme that we were talking about a little bit, even with First Vice Club. I think this pushes it much further and kind of has a more serious tone to it, obviously. So, but yeah, I love this movie. As a movie, I think it's almost a near perfect movie in my mind. And this is what we were talking about. The script is obviously very good. It's
Mm-hmm.
brilliantly acted by everybody, but in a lesser director's hands, this movie could have been very schlocky or very
Mm-hmm.
cheesy or very sentimental. But and it is at times for sure. But I think Gus Van Sant, I don't know if people give him enough credit for this movie because there's so many other highs of this movie that take away all the credit. But he's does such a great job all the way from establishing sense of place, like exactly where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
You're transported. Danny Elfman's score, the mise en scène that we talk about often
Mm-hmm.
in our podcast, it's just so perfect. The performances are so dialed in the right kind of way. Again, this movie can be kind of unbearable, honestly, if it didn't have like a good control on all these different pieces, which I think Gus Van Sant just does such a great job. um Two things I'll mention before I hand it over to you. Every time I watch this movie, I'm once again reminded by how amazing Mini Driver is.
Mm-hmm.
And I always forget after I've watched the movie, which is so sad because it's Robin Williams and Matt Damon and then Ben Affleck, and the script and all of it and their Oscar, that sort of stands up in in your head. But Minnie Driver is so good in this movie. Their relationship, the way it sort of forms and the way it builds and the way it doesn't go anywhere, it's just so heartbreaking to me. Um, and the other thing, on slightly on a critical note, after watching this movie maybe the 50th time again in prep for this podcast, I just felt there's a little bit too much exposition. I wish there were fewer words said in various parts of the movie, then this movie would be kind of absolutely perfect for me. But that said, it's still a great movie. I love it. It's sort of it's in your neck of the woods. So,
That's right.
whenever I watch this movie, I always think of you too in a way. So, yeah.
Yeah, this movie's great. I hadn't seen it in a very long time, actually. I loved it when I first saw it when came out in theaters
Mhm.
in late 90s, then saw it a couple times in college, and just coming back to it now, like 15, 20 years later, it still just has all the power that it did when I first saw it. I mean, I think all the things you said about performances definitely all across the board great. But I do think that, yeah, with the Gus Van Sant angle, this movie walks a pretty fine line between being like too heart on its sleeve,
Yeah.
but then also like what tries to be realistic. But it does both. And I think that's a
Yeah.
lot the credit to him. And I can't remember if this was Van Sant or one of the other producers, but the original like concept of this film when Matt and Ben were writing it, was it going to be like a thriller where Matt's character is going to try to be recruited by the CIA because he was like super smart, and this whole sort of like political thriller thing.
Oh,
And
wow.
I can't recall, and this is maybe on me, like if it was Gus that was like, no, just like pull it all down, or whether that was like Kevin Smith, who was one of their friends, like someone gave him that advice to kind of strip it down to like just making it a story about this guy and escaping, South Boston. And I think that is what this, that other version of this movie just would have been not at all as good.
No.
But I think, again, I can't remember if that was Van Sant or not, but yeah, I think too, yes, Robin Williams, who I think is his best performance
Yeah.
in anything, and
Incredible.
him and Ben, I'm sorry, Matt, chemistry is great. But I do also think, and watching this with friendship specifically, that the Affleck character too, I think at the right moments knows how to push
True.
Matt as well. And I was even thinking it, like there's a speech that he gives, where they're at the construction site, and he's basically telling him, look, like this is my life, like I'm not a smart guy, like this is gonna be me forever, but like I know you're better than this, like you should do this, like it's
Yeah.
kind of like for us, like our friends, like we kind of want you to kind of fulfill all the promise that you have, which we clearly don't feel like held back by us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was almost wondering like whether that moment, as much as Robin was kind of breaking things down for Matt and helping his character understand what his potential was, that it was that final shove from someone like really in his community that he grew up with, that maybe he never thought that Affleck would ever have that real heart to heart with him. And it was only when they had that moment, I feel like, because they were doing some, he bust him out of prison, or when he got into jail, like Affleck would be there to help him.
Mm-hmm.
He was helping Affleck with the guy at the bar where, that he was trying to like make fun of him, and Ben comes in and kind of dresses that smart Harvard guy down. So like they have that sort of, that male kind of how males express those feelings of friendship, that is all there. But it's that moment where Ben is like, look, like, dude, I don't want you, I don't want to see you anymore. Like I wish that you would leave. And showing that real vulnerability and taking all of that things down and being a real friend. That moment in that scene really stood out to me, because throughout the rest of that whole movie, they had walls up. Essentially, it was like that male friendship. And that was a real friendship moment when then they kind of tear that down a little bit. And he's like, no, dude, you gotta
No,
go.
you're
And
absolutely right.
at the end, when, he goes to his house, which is going to happen because they set it up, but it still is very moving, and he's not there. And Ben Affleck is like so happy that like his friend is finally doing what he always wanted him to do. It's a nice moment.
It's a really nice moment. No, you're totally right. I think without that, I don't think Matt takes that jump.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, well, who knows? But I feel like that is an important part of that journey for him too. As much as the Robin Williams piece, they both give each other a lot of that give and take. Like Robin ends the movie in a better shape. Like he's now going off and kind of not dwelling in his sadness anymore about his wife's passing because of what Matt's able to teach him. So they kind of give and take there. But the Ben Affleck piece, maybe just gotta love Ben Affleck. But I was focused a lot on that and watching this, and just that scene especially was really like showing how much he really loved him. He loved him so much to be like, you should leave. Like, don't be around me anymore. I don't want you to do this just to help protect us. Like,
and that's a much harder thing to do, letting go of somebody that you love, actually.
Yeah,
so
totally.
There's no truer form of showing love for somebody. So no,
yeah,
I totally agree. I totally agree. I'm glad that you enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, I love this movie, and it was like I always knew I really liked it. And again, it had been so long since I'd seen it. It was great to kind of throw it back on and be like, no, this movie is just really a classic, one of the best films of the 90s for sure, and kind of deserves the reputation that it has. Which sometimes you go back to these films and it's like, oh, okay, well, this was great at the time, and I get why this is so lauded, but like, it's not a classic. No, this is definitely for sure a classic. Yeah,
it really is. The last thing I'm going to say, I also just noticed this time watching this movie that when characters in this movie laugh and cry, like you were saying, it just is so real to me, you know, especially laughing. I think it's much easier. I think I'm not an actor, but to me, it sort of seems that it's probably easier to show genuine sad emotion that can, you know, sweep you up. It's much harder to laugh as though you've heard this for the first time, even though you're probably on the 55th take.
Yeah.
And that whole sequence when Robin Williams is talking about how his wife used to fart in his sleep.
Oh, yeah.
And the way Matt laughs at that and the two laugh at it, it's just, again, this is texture. You know, you could easily write this line off and it wouldn't hurt the movie, but it actually will hurt the movie because it brings these people together. But what you really see is just two people laughing like that. It's just so, I don't know, so wonderful to me. I laughed with it, was moved by it, you know, on a moment like that, because that's what real friendships and relationships are based on. It's about the big moments, the nostalgia, the shit that you've been through, but to me, it's more about these moments, I think, you know?
Yeah, I know. And I wonder if this movie had an advantage because it was written by two friends.
Yeah, of course.
Who, you know,
I didn't even mention that. There's whole meta commentary.
Totally. You know, they've gone through their, you know, in the last 20 years, their different peaks and valleys in their friendship. And I'm sure there's a lot that we don't even know because we're just looking at it from the outside. But you can, I think, this movie benefits from the writing and maybe even the performances too, that these are two guys who like are in this together. They're both trying to go after the same thing, which is success in Hollywood as creative forces. And then, it is great to see them succeed too. Like this movie put them on the map, won them the Oscar, like started both of their careers. And to have it come from this, you know, bonding of, you know, I'm sure they put a lot of their own relationships into those two characters, and as they were writing it, it just it's like it lifts the movie to an even another level, because you know that behind that are these two real friends that are really trying to come together and create something and accomplish something together, and then they did it, which is exciting too.
Exactly. And who doesn't love that success story, right?
Yeah, it's great.
It's a great Hollywood story on its own, and small movie which is elevated. You know, we talk a lot about the state of movies on this podcast, and this to me is a perfect example that a big movie doesn't have to be, you know, with fireworks and what have you. It can be a small movie, but if it's done well, it doesn't feel small at all. It feels so big in its scope and in deep in its what it's trying to accomplish.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.